Elephant cries every day in zoo. Then one day, he sees a familiar silhouette. The sound ripped through the humid afternoon air, a guttural bellow that wasn't the trumpeting call of dominance or excitement, but a raw, tearing moan of pure anguish. It echoed off the crumbling concrete walls of the enclosure, a sound so profoundly sorrowful it silenced the chatter of zoo visitors and drew pitying glances. From the viewing platform you could see him, Tongue the lone bull elephant, standing rigidly in the far corner of his barren enclosure. His massive head hung low, great ears listless at his sides. His eyes, usually intelligent and deep, were red-rimmed and seemed fixed on some point beyond the rusting perimeter fence towards the distant line of jungle green. Tears, thick and viscous, tracked paths through the dust on his leathery cheeks. Whether from physical irritation in the poorly maintained enclosure or something deeper, no one could say for sure. This heart-wrenching display wasn't an anomaly. It was Tongue's daily reality, a ritual of despair that baffled and saddened everyone who witnessed it. What secret sorrow could haunt such a magnificent creature day after day? The answer is more shocking than you can imagine, a story woven through time loss and unexpected reunions. Make sure you watch the full video to uncover the entire truth behind Tongue's tears. And if you believe in the deep emotional lives of animals and the fight for their well-being, please show your support. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification button so you don't miss any more vital stories like this from us, Lan, a zookeeper whose gentle nature seemed perpetually at odds with the harsh reality of her workplace. Watched Tongue from near the service gate, her heart aching with a familiar helplessness. She'd tried everything: enrichment toys that lay ignored favorite fruits offered, with soothing words, extra time spent simply being near him. Nothing pierced the veil of his grief. He tolerated her presence sometimes, acknowledging her with a low rumble, but inevitably he would return to his corner, his gaze lost, and the terrible sounds would begin again. The zoo itself was a relic, starved of funding and seemingly forgotten by the bustling city growing around its edges. Enclosures were too small, repairs were makeshift, and the spirit of the place felt as worn down as the peeling paint. Lan did her best, pouring her affection and limited resources into the animals under her care. But for Tongue, she felt she was failing. His sorrow was a tangible thing, a heavy shroud over his enclosure, a constant heartbreaking mystery that defied all her efforts. Today, the weight felt heavier, the air thick with unspoken tension. Something was different. A change was coming, though Lan couldn't yet know if it would bring salvation or final despair for the weeping elephant. The Vin Cang Municipal Zoo was less a sanctuary and more a sad afterthought on the city's sprawling map. Built decades ago with optimistic grandeur, it had slowly succumbed to neglect, bureaucratic indifference, and chronic underfunding. Paint-peeled concrete cracked, and the lush tropical vegetation often seemed healthier outside the fences than within the barren animal enclosures. For Lan, a quiet, middle-aged woman with kind eyes and hands roughened by years of manual labor, the zoo had been her life's work. She'd started as a young assistant full of ideals about animal welfare and had stayed on driven by a fierce dedication to the creatures who depended on her, even as her initial optimism faded into weary perseverance. She knew every animal's quirk, their favorite treats, the subtle signs of illness or distress. But Tongue remained an enigma. He had arrived 15 years ago, a traumatized, underweight adolescent bull, acquired under circumstances that were always vaguely described by the zoo's owner, Mr. Hung, as a private transfer. Lan had overseen his settling-in period, witnessing firsthand his deep-seated fear and mistrust, which slowly over years yielded to a grudging tolerance, particularly towards her. But the profound sadness, the daily ritual of mournful cries and vacant staring had never truly left him. It had worsened in recent years, becoming a constant, disturbing fixture of the zoo's atmosphere. Visitors often complained or left deeply unsettled by the sight. Lan documented his behavior, meticulously pleading with Mr. Hung for veterinary consultations, behavioral specialists, anything that might help Mr. Hung, however, was a man motivated solely by profit, however meager the zoo's earnings might be. He was short, perpetually sweating with eyes that darted nervously and a dismissive wave for any concerns that didn't involve immediate costs or potential fines. He saw the animals as assets, inventory, their well-being secondary to the bottom line. He deflected Lan's pleas, blaming Tung's behavior on stubbornness or old age. Though Tung was only in his late 20s, barely middle-aged for an elephant, Lan suspected the enclosure's inadequacy and Tung's profound loneliness were major factors. But she felt powerless against Hung's apathy and the zoo's inertia. She focused on providing Tung with the best care she could muster, within the limitations spending her own money on better quality feed, sometimes talking to him for hours, hoping her presence offered some small comfort. The inciting incident arrived not with a roar, but with a phone call that sent a ripple of anxiety through the already tense atmosphere of the zoo. Mr. Hung summoned Lan to his cluttered, dusty office, his usual bluster replaced with a sheen of nervous sweat. "Lan," he began, avoiding her gaze, "listen up. We have an important visitor coming tomorrow. Dr. Min, you know, the big-shot conservationist from World Animal Foundation." Lan's heart sank. She knew Dr. Min by reputation, a Vietnamese-born, internationally respected expert on wildlife conservation, particularly elephants. He had spent years in Africa and Asia, known for his rigorous standards, his sharp eye for malpractice, and his history of recommending closures for substandard facilities. An inspection by Dr. Min could spell disaster. For Vinh Cang Zoo, Hung clearly felt the pressure. "He's doing a tour checking standards." Hung continued, shuffling papers nervously. "Everything needs to be perfect, especially the elephant enclosure. Keep Tung quiet if you can. No incidents." Understand. Lan understood all too well. Hung wasn't worried about Tung's welfare. He was worried about being exposed. This inspection was a threat to his negligent operation. While fear for the zoo's future and her own job pricked at Lan, a different feeling began to surface, a flicker of desperate hope. Dr. Min wasn't just an inspector. He was an elephant expert. Could he perhaps finally understand Tung's sorrow? Could his arrival, intended as a threat by Hung, inadvertently become the catalyst for change, for uncovering the truth behind Tung's tears? Lan nodded mutely to Hung, her mind already racing. The arrival of Dr. Min wasn't just an inspection. It felt like a potential turning point, a moment that could force the secrets held within the zoo's decaying walls out into the open. Her goal shifted subtly, not just to survive the inspection, but to ensure Dr. Min saw the real Tung, the suffering elephant hidden behind Hung's attempts at superficial tidiness. Dr. Min arrived precisely at 9 the next morning. He was leaner and taller than Lan had pictured, with weathered features, intense, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and an air of quiet authority honed by years spent in challenging field conditions. He moved with purpose, his inspection beginning immediately, his questions polite but probing. Mr. Hung hovered nearby, offering overly effusive greetings and transparently attempting to steer men towards the few marginally acceptable exhibits, nervously wiping sweat from his brow. Despite the early hour, Lon accompanied them, answering men's questions about animal diets, enrichment protocols, and veterinary records. Honestly, even when the answers reflected poorly on the zoo's management, she noticed Hung shooting her warning glances, but she met Dr. Min's steady gaze and spoke the truth. Min's examination of the primate house and the big cat enclosures was thorough, his expression growing increasingly grim as he noted the cramped spaces, the lack of stimulation, and the barely adequate sanitation. He made meticulous notes in a small, worn notebook. His silence more damning than any outburst, Hung's forced smiles became increasingly strained. Finally, Min turned towards the elephant enclosure. "And the Asian elephant?" he asked, his tone neutral but expectant. Hung visibly tensed. "Ah, yes, Tung, our bull elephant, a bit temperamental, you understand, but generally healthy." He stammered, launching into a pre-rehearsed, overly positive description. Lan stayed quiet, her heart pounding. This was the moment. As they approached the familiar, depressing enclosure, Tung was in his usual corner, swaying slightly, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. The mournful sound seemed to amplify in the sudden quiet as Min paused at the railing, his gaze fixed on the elephant. For a long moment, he simply observed his face, unreadable. Tung continued his rhythmic swaying, seemingly oblivious. Then slowly, Tung lifted his massive head. His ears flared slightly. He turned his gaze, sweeping across the small group at the railing. When his eyes landed on Dr. Min, he froze. The swaying stopped. The rumbling ceased. The air became electric with sudden, inexplicable tension. Tung stared intently at Min, his body rigid. Then a sound unlike his usual mournful cries erupted from him. A deep, resonant rumble that built rapidly into a powerful, joyous, trumpeting call. It wasn't sorrow, it was recognition. Before anyone could react, Tung charged towards the railing where Min stood, not with aggression, but with an astonishing, focused energy. He stopped just short of the barrier, his trunk outstretched, sniffing the air, his eyes wide and fixed on Min's face. Min stood utterly frozen, his professional composure shattered, color drained from his face, replaced by astonishment and a dawning, unbelievable recognition. His hand holding the notebook trembled visibly. He took a hesitant step closer to the railing, ignoring Hung's sputtering protests. "Tung," Min whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Tung oi, is it? Is it really you?" The elephant responded with another series of deep rumbles, nudging his trunk against the heavy bars as close to Min as he could reach. Tears welled in Min's eyes, mirroring the perpetual moisture in the elephant's. He reached out a trembling hand, laying it gently on the rough, warm skin of Tung's trunk. "I can't believe it!" Min breathed, oblivious now to Lan and Hung, standing stunned beside him. After all these years. Turning to Lan, his voice choked, Min explained the words tumbling out. 15 years ago, I was working with an anti-poaching unit in central Vietnam. We raided a camp. They had just killed a mother elephant for her tusks. Hidden nearby, terrified, was her calf. Tiny thing, barely a few months old. He looked back at Tongue, who was still pressing gently against the bars. I named him Tongue. I cared for him for almost a year at our rescue center. He was smart, resilient, attached. Men swallowed hard. Then funding was cut. The center had to downsize. Tongue was transferred, the paperwork said, to a licensed sanctuary abroad. I lost track of him. I thought. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, his gaze locked with the elephant he had saved as an orphan. Lan listened, her own eyes filling with tears, understanding flooding through her. Tongue's endless sorrow wasn't just about loneliness or poor conditions. It was the deep primal grief of an orphan, separated first from his mother by brutal violence, and then from the human who had become his surrogate parent. His cries were the echoes of that original trauma, reignited daily by his confinement and isolation. Hung, however, looked horrified. The recognition, the story, it was clearly not part of his plan. He tried to interject, "Dr. Min, a remarkable coincidence truly, but perhaps just a case of mistaken identity. Tongue has been here." "There is no mistake." Min cut him off, his voice regaining its steel, now laced with cold fury, as he looked from the magnificent elephant trapped in the squalid enclosure to the sweating, nervous zoo owner. "This is Tongue. I'd know him anywhere." The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Min now knew Tongue wasn't just any elephant. He was his elephant, a living testament to a past rescue now found in appalling conditions under dubious circumstances. The inspection had just become intensely personal. Min's gaze swept over the enclosure again, this time not just as an inspector, but as someone with a deep, protective connection to its sole inhabitant. He saw the inadequate space, the lack of mud wallows, the sheer barrenness. With new, enraged eyes, he turned back to Hung, his expression hardening. "Mr. Hung," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "we need to talk about Tongue's acquisition records." Now, Hung flinched as if struck. The complication wasn't just the poor conditions anymore. It was the explosive history that had just been unearthed, and the direct personal conflict it created between the powerful conservationist and the cornered zoo owner. The atmosphere in Mr. Hung's cramped office was thick with tension. Dr. Min sat opposite Hung's cluttered desk, his face a mask of controlled anger, while Lan stood near the door ostensibly organizing files. But listening intently, Hung, sweating profusely, fumbled through disorganized stacks of paper, producing faded, vaguely worded documents that supposedly detailed Tongue's transfer 15 years ago. As you can see, Dr. Hung stammered, pushing a flimsy folder across the desk, a legitimate transfer from a holding facility, fully licensed. Min scanned the documents, his eyes sharp. "This holding facility, where is it located? There's no address here, and the licensing number seems incomplete." He tapped a specific line. "This signature, it's barely legible. Who authorized this transfer?" Hung blustered, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "It was a long time ago, Doctor. Record-keeping wasn't as stringent then, but rest assured everything was above board, just a standard zoo-to-zoo transfer." Min leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense pitch. "Mr. Hung, I spent a year raising that elephant calf. I personally oversaw the attempts to place him in a reputable sanctuary. The facility named here," he tapped the paper again harder, "this time doesn't ring any bells. And frankly, given the condition I find Tongue in and his clear distress, I have serious doubts about the legitimacy of this entire transaction. Hung's face paled further. He saw his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Min wasn't just a random inspector. He was directly connected to Tung's past, a past Hung clearly had reason to obscure. While Min pressed Hung for more details, demanding contact information for the supposed originating facility, Lan, organizing files in the corner, noticed something slide out from under a stack of unrelated invoices near Hung's overflowing waste bin. It was a small leather-bound ledger, looking much older than the surrounding paperwork. Her heart quickened. Hung was distracted, arguing defensively with Min. Moving quietly, Lan nudged the ledger with her foot further under the cabinet out of immediate sight. She couldn't risk retrieving it now, but its furtive placement felt significant. The confrontation ended with Min clearly unsatisfied and Hung visibly shaken. Min stated he would be extending his visit and conducting a more thorough investigation into the zoo's records and Tung's provenance. As Min left the office to continue his inspection elsewhere, Hung sank back into his chair, muttering curses under his breath. Lan finished her tidying and excused herself, her mind racing. Later that afternoon, while Hung was occupied dealing with a minor emergency, at the reptile house, Lan slipped back into the office. Heart pounding, she retrieved the hidden ledger. It wasn't official zoo records. It looked like a personal logbook. Flipping through the brittle pages, her eyes widened in shock. It detailed transactions dating back over 20 years. Coded names, locations, sums of money, and animal species. It was a record of illegal wildlife trafficking. Her blood ran cold as she found entries from 15 years ago, notations about a shipment from the Central Highlands specifically mentioning an calf mother terminated, and the payment recipient coded in the margin matched the illegible signature on the flimsy transfer document Hung had shown Min. The truth hit Lan with sickening force. Hung hadn't acquired Tung through legitimate channels. He was directly involved in the illegal wildlife trade. Tung wasn't transferred. He was sold, likely laundered through a non-existent or complicit holding facility to end up here. Hung's panic wasn't just about poor conditions. It was about his criminal past being exposed by the one person on Earth who could recognize Tung and connect the dots. Just then, Lan heard Hung returning down the corridor. Hastily, she snapped a few photos of the most damning pages. With her phone, slid the ledger back under the cabinet and slipped out of the office just as Hung entered, his face dark with suspicion. Her hands were trembling. This discovery was the turning point. It shifted everything. This wasn't just about neglect anymore. It was about serious, organized crime with Tung as living evidence. Lan knew she couldn't keep this to herself. She had to find Min immediately. They weren't just trying to improve conditions or expose negligence. They were now fighting to save Tung from a desperate criminal who would do anything to silence the past. They had moved from being observers and investigators to active players in a dangerous game. There was no turning back. Confronting Hung directly or going to the authorities now carried real risks. But leaving Tung in Hung's hands was unthinkable. The point of no return had been reached. They had to act, and act quickly. Before Hung could make Tung disappear permanently, Lan found Dr. Min near the aviary, his expression grim as he observed the overcrowded cages. Pulling him aside, her voice trembling with urgency, she quickly showed him the photos on her phone, whispering her discovery about the ledger and Hung's involvement in trafficking. Min's face hardened, his earlier anger solidifying into cold determination. "This confirms my suspicions," he said grimly. The vague records, Hung's nervousness, Tung's condition, it all pointed to something illicit. He knows we know, or at least he knows I recognize Tung, and that's enough to make him panic. "What do we do?" Lan asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "He could try to move Tung, hide him." "Exactly," Min agreed. "We need concrete proof, more than just these photos if possible, and we need to involve the authorities, specifically the environmental police or a wildlife crime unit. But we have to be careful. If Hung suspects we're onto his trafficking operation, he might react unpredictably. Tung's safety is paramount." Their planning began in hushed tones, snatched conversations during Min's continued, now more focused inspection. They decided Min would continue pressing Hung for official documentation, creating a smokescreen of bureaucratic procedure, while Lan would try to gain more access to Hung's office or records, looking for anything that might corroborate the ledger or indicate Hung's immediate plans for Tung. The next 24 hours were fraught with tension. Hung became increasingly evasive, shadowing Min constantly or disappearing for long periods, making hushed phone calls. Lan felt his suspicious eyes on her whenever she was near the office. She managed to retrieve the ledger again, briefly, photographing more pages, but found nothing indicating an imminent move for Tung. Fear gnawed at her. Were they too late? Had Hung already made arrangements? That evening, as the zoo closed and shadows lengthened, Lan lingered, pretending to complete her final checks. The zoo felt eerily quiet, amplifying her anxiety. She heard raised voices coming from Hung's office. He was on the phone, his tone sharp and angry. Creeping closer, hiding behind a large potted plant near the partially opened door, Lan strained to hear, "Tonight. Yes, tonight. No delays." Hung hissed into the phone. "The main gate, midnight. Use the livestock transport, the big one. No markings. Just get the asset loaded and out of here before dawn. The location I gave you, keep him there until I arrange final sale, and be discreet. That damned conservationist is sniffing around everywhere." Lan's blood ran cold. The asset. Tung Hung was moving him tonight. He planned to sell him off into the illegal trade network, likely to a private collector or another unscrupulous zoo abroad, where he would disappear forever. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to warn Min. She found Min at his modest hotel near the city center, pacing his room. Quickly, breathlessly, she relayed what she had overheard. Min listened intently, his face grim. "Midnight. That doesn't give us much time." He immediately contacted a trusted senior official he knew within the National Environmental Police Unit, explaining the situation. The suspected trafficking, the imminent illegal transport of the elephant, the evidence Lan had gathered. The official took it seriously, promising to dispatch a team to intercept the transport at the zoo's main gate. Lan and Min waited agonizingly near the zoo's perimeter, hidden in the darkness, watching the main gate. Midnight approached, then passed. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. No large livestock truck arrived. No police team materialized either. Min received a frustrating call citing jurisdictional confusion and procedural delays. The local precinct was slow to respond to the environmental police's alert. Just as despair began to set in, a flicker of movement near the back service gate caught Lan's eye. A large, unmarked truck, different from the zoo's usual vehicles, was quietly maneuvering near the elephant enclosure's rear access point. Hung wasn't using the main gate. He was using a less obvious route, They watched in horror as shadowy figures worked quickly using ramps and hushed commands. They could faintly hear Tung's distressed rumbles. Before Lan or Min could even think of intervening alone, the truck's engine started and it pulled away, disappearing into the network of dark service roads behind the zoo. "They've got him." Lan cried, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "We were too late." Min clenched his fists, frustration and fury warring within him. He called the environmental police again, reporting the back gate activity, but knew it would take time for anyone to react. Now that the truck was mobile, it felt hopeless. Tung was gone, spirited away into the night by criminals. This was their dark night of the soul, the moment when failure seemed absolute. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows near the service gate. Tuan, one of the zoo's younger security guards. Lan recognized him. He was quiet, observant, and known to dislike Hung's management style. He approached them hesitantly. "Ms. Lan, Dr. Min, I saw the truck too." He whispered urgently, "I've suspected Mr. Hung was moving animals out the back way for months tonight. When I saw that specific truck, I did something." He held up a small smartphone. "I managed to attach a magnetic GPS tracker to the undercarriage while they were distracted, getting the ramp set up. I didn't know what else to do." Hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through Lan and Min's despair. A tracker, Min grabbed Tuan's arm. "Can you track it now? Where is it heading?" Tuan nodded, his fingers flying across the screen. A map illuminated his face. "It's moving fast, heading north, out of the city, towards the old industrial district near the abandoned port. Relay this information to the police contact now," Min commanded, already dialing his contact again, relaying the incredible update and the GPS coordinates. "We need to follow that signal. Lan, Tuan, are you coming?" There was no hesitation. The three of them piled into Min's rented car, Tuan navigating via the phone's GPS signal, racing through the dark, deserted streets. They were back in the fight, armed with a desperate technological edge, chasing a faint electronic signal that represented their last chance to save Tung from vanishing forever into the dark underworld of wildlife trafficking. The final confrontation was imminent. The GPS signal led them to a sprawling, derelict warehouse complex in the city's decaying industrial zone near the old port. Rusting fences, broken windows, and an air of utter desolation marked the area. Tuan pointed towards a large corrugated metal structure with faint lights leaking from beneath a poorly fitting loading bay door. "That's it. The signal stops here." Just as they pulled up, several police vehicles, sirens silenced, converged on the location, lights flashing briefly before being extinguished. The environmental police, finally coordinating with local units, had arrived, guided by Min's relayed coordinates. Officers clad in tactical gear quickly established a perimeter. Min, Lan, and Tuan stayed back with the commanding officer, watching as the team prepared to breach the warehouse. The raid was swift and decisive. The heavy loading door was forced open with a screech of tortured metal. Shouts echoed from within. "Police, don't move!" followed by sounds of scuffling, surprised yells, and orders being barked. Min and Lan held their breath, straining to hear any sound from Tung. After a few tense minutes, the commanding officer waved them forward. They entered the vast, dimly lit space. The scene was chaotic but controlled. Several rough-looking men were handcuffed and being held against a wall. Makeshift cages and containers lined the warehouse floor, holding not just Tung, but a horrifying array of other trafficked wildlife. Pangolins curled tightly in fear, exotic birds crammed into tiny cages, small primates pacing frantically. The air was thick with the stench of fear and filth. And there, in the center of the warehouse, chained by 3 legs to thick metal rings bolted to the concrete floor, stood Tongue. He looked terrified, his eyes wide, rumbling nervously at the commotion, but blessedly unharmed. Standing near him, his face pale and slack with disbelief and terror, as an officer snapped handcuffs onto his wrists, was Mr. Hung. He had clearly been overseeing the operation personally. His eyes met Min's across the cavernous space, filled not with defiance, but with utter defeat. Ignoring Hung completely, Min walked slowly towards Tongue, speaking his name softly in Vietnamese. Tung oi! Tung, it's okay now. You're safe. The elephant fell silent, his nervous rumbling subsiding. He watched Min approach his ears, flicking forward. When Min was close enough, Tongue reached out his trunk, not with force, but with a gentle, questing touch, resting the tip lightly on Min's shoulder, just as he had at the zoo railing. A deep, soft rumble vibrated through the elephant's chest, a sound not of sorrow or fear, but of recognition, trust, and perhaps relief. Lan watched, tears streaming down her face, Tuan beside her, looking overwhelmed but relieved. The central question, could they save Tongue, had been answered amidst the grim evidence of widespread animal cruelty and crime. This quiet moment of connection between man and elephant felt like a profound victory. Hung was caught, the trafficking ring exposed, and Tongue was finally safe from the man who had exploited him for 15 years. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Wildlife veterinarians arrived to assess Tongue and the other rescued animals. Evidence technicians cataloged the cage's chains and transaction records found in a small office within the warehouse. Hung and his associates were formally arrested and taken into custody, facing a raft of serious charges related to wildlife trafficking, animal cruelty, and potentially corruption. The news of the raid and the dismantling of a major trafficking ring operating under the guise of the Vinh Cang Municipal Zoo sent shockwaves through the city and the wider conservation community. The zoo was immediately closed pending a full investigation. In the chaotic aftermath, Lan and Tuan provided detailed statements to the police, their bravery and Tuan's quick thinking, with the tracker earning them quiet praise from the officers. Dr. Min worked tirelessly, liaising with authorities and international conservation groups to ensure the proper care and placement of all the rescued animals. Tung, after being carefully sedated and examined, was transported under police escort not back to the zoo, but to a temporary quarantine facility at a reputable National Wildlife Rescue Center. It was during the meticulous inventory of Hung's seized belongings from the warehouse office that the final chilling piece of the puzzle emerged. Tucked away in a locked desk drawer, police found Hung's old leather-bound ledger, the one Lan had partially photographed, along with several older notebooks. One contained diary-like entries from over 15 years ago. An entry dated shortly before Tung's arrival at the zoo described Hung personally accompanying poachers into the Central Highlands. It chillingly detailed the hunt, the targeting of a large female elephant with impressive tusks, and the subsequent capture of her distressed calf. The entry concluded, "Mother terminated cleanly, calf secured for transfer, profitable venture." Min felt sickened as the police investigator read him the translated passage. Hung hadn't just bought an orphaned calf from poachers, He had been present at the kill, potentially even ordering it, directly responsible for murdering Tung's mother to obtain him. Tung's lifelong sorrow suddenly gained a horrifying new depth. He hadn't just lost his mother to poachers, he had spent 15 years in the care of the very man responsible for her death. The revelation added further weight to the charges against Hung, ensuring he would face the full force of the law. For Lan Min and Tuan, it underscored the profound justice of Tung's rescue. The Vin Kong Zoo never reopened. Its assets were seized and plans were made with input from Dr. Min's foundation to convert the land into a small educational nature park. Focused on local flora land, was offered a position at the National Rescue Center where she could continue working with animals. In a facility that prioritized their welfare, Tuan received commendations and a promotion within the city's security services. Dr. Min oversaw Tung's eventual transfer to a sprawling semi-wild sanctuary in neighboring Thailand, known for its ethical treatment and large elephant herds. Months later, Min sent Lan a video. It showed Tung interacting with other elephants, splashing in a large river, dusting himself under the shade of giant trees. He still carried the scars of his past visible in the slight wariness in his eyes, but the deep, mournful cries were gone. He was finally free, living the life that had been stolen from him so long ago. Watching the video, Lan felt a quiet sense of peace. Justice had been served not just through the courts, but in the restoration of freedom for an elephant who had cried every day until a familiar silhouette from his distant past arrived to unlock the truth.